In the summer of 1709, a British privateer named Woodes Rogers pulled alongside a battered ship drifting 300 miles off the coast of Chile. There was no one at the helm. The deck was silent. He expected to find corpses. Instead, he found 17 men barely conscious, their lips cracked and blackened, their eyes glassy, not from wounds, not from disease, but from thirst. The ship's water barrels were empty. They had been empty for 11 days. The ocean surrounded them in every direction, hundreds of millions of gallons of water within arm's reach, and every single drop of it was trying to kill them. This is the thing about seawater that sounds completely backwards until you understand the biology of it. The salt concentration in the ocean is roughly 3 times higher than what the human kidney can process. When you drink it, your body doesn't absorb it. It panics. It starts pulling water out of your own cells and organs to dilute the incoming salt load. You urinate more than you consumed. Your cells shrink. Your blood thickens. The more you drink, the faster you die. It is, as one 18th century ship surgeon put it, drinking the sea to satisfy a thirst that only the sea creates. Men who knew this, who had been told it, who had watched it happen to others, would still drink from the ocean when the thirst became unbearable enough. Because the human brain, deprived of water for long enough, stops processing consequences and starts processing only the present moment. And in that present moment, there is an ocean. And you are thirsty. Pirates understood this problem more intimately than almost any other people alive during that era. Royal Navy vessels, badly managed as they often were, at least operated with some institutional knowledge about provisioning. Pirates operated on improvisation. A pirate captain planning a voyage had to decide what to put in the hold. Weapons, ammunition, food, trade goods, rum, and fresh water competed for every inch of that space. Wooden barrels were enormous. A standard butt, which is what they were actually called, held around 50 gallons and weighed over 400 pounds when full. Carrying enough water for a crew of 40 men for a month at sea meant dozens of these barrels taking up space that could otherwise hold cargo. Most captains made the calculation that they would find water along the way. Sometimes they were right. Sometimes they were those 17 men drifting off Chile. Blackbeard steered Edward Teach, the most theatrically terrifying pirate of the Golden Age, reportedly told his quartermaster during one extended Caribbean voyage that he feared running dry more than he feared the British Navy. Coming from a man who was known to light slow-burning fuses in his own beard before battle, to wade into fights with 6 pistols strapped across his chest, this was a meaningful statement about priorities. The Navy you could fight or outrun. Thirst you could not negotiate with. The first solution pirates came to was obvious: collect rain. But the gap between collect rain as an idea and collect rain as a functional system is enormous, and getting it wrong wasted the one resource you were trying to capture. Early attempts amounted to spreading whatever canvas was available and hoping water pooled somewhere useful. Most of it ran off the edges or contaminated itself against sails stiff with weeks of accumulated salt spray, which meant you were drinking water with a brine taste that made dehydration worse, not better. The men who figured this out first were the ones who survived to teach others. The refined version involved preparation before the clouds even arrived. Crews who knew what they were doing would break out their cleanest canvas, sometimes washing it with whatever water they could spare, which was a genuinely painful investment, and rig it into funnel configurations calculated to direct flow toward barrel openings. They built improvised gutters from wood scraps, rope, and whatever metal pieces weren't already serving another purpose, creating channels that could route water from the edges of the canvas into storage without losing it to splashing or wind. A well-organized crew working a good tropical storm could collect dozens of gallons in an hour. This was transformative. This was the difference between making landfall and being found drifting. When rain wasn't available, some crews turned to dew. Sheepskins or thick cloth left exposed to the night air in humid regions would accumulate condensation by morning. You'd wring them out at dawn. The yield was almost insultingly small, perhaps a few cups per hide after a good night. But when you are rationing water to half a pint per man per day, a few cups matters. The men assigned to dew collection rotations understood that their job was not impressive and was absolutely necessary, which is a combination that tends to produce reliable workers. But all of this depended on weather that did not follow anyone's schedule. The Caribbean could go weeks without significant rainfall in the dry season. Dew collection barely functioned in the drier regions. Pirates needed solutions they could control, and so they turned to chemistry. Not that any of them would have called it that. The storage problem was in many ways worse than the collection problem. A crew that successfully harvested rainwater could watch their supply turn on them within days. The wooden barrels that held everything on a sailing ship were not neutral containers. Oak absorbs whatever has been stored in it, and most barrels had long histories. Former wine vessels, former rum casks, former containers for things that did not bear thinking about too carefully. Water poured into these barrels would take on flavors within hours. Within days, especially in tropical heat, it would develop a film on the surface. Within a week, it could be genuinely dangerous. Bacteria thrived in the dark, moist, warm interior of a wooden barrel the way bacteria thrives nowhere else on Earth. The standard response to water that smelled wrong was to hold your nose and drink it anyway, because the alternative was dying of thirst. Men who drank badly contaminated water got dysentery, which caused the kind of fluid loss that accelerated the dehydration they were already fighting. There are accounts of entire pirate crews incapacitated not by enemy action, but by their own water supply. The solution that emerged, and no one knows exactly who discovered it first, because it spread through pirate networks the way all useful information spread, quietly and without attribution, was to char the inside of the barrels. The process was straightforward. You lit a controlled fire inside an empty oak barrel, let the interior wood blacken, stopped before structural damage occurred, and then filled it with water. What the charred layer did was function as a primitive but genuinely effective filter. Activated charcoal, sack, which is what charred wood becomes, bonds with organic compounds and many types of bacteria, pulling them out of the water that contacts it. The water stored in charred barrels lasted measurably, noticeably longer. Instead of turning green and foul after 4 or 5 days, it could remain drinkable for weeks. What makes this discovery strange is that the same technique, applied to the same materials for similar reasons, is the foundation of bourbon whiskey production. American distillers char their oak barrels before filling them with spirit. The charring filters impurities and imparts flavor. This is not a coincidence. The principle is identical. Pirates, trying to keep water from killing them, independently invented the same chemical process that would eventually define an entire category of American spirits. They were not trying to make whiskey. They had no idea what they were doing in any scientific sense. They just noticed that burnt wood kept water cleaner. And they told each other, and the knowledge spread. The silver discovery was even stranger. At some point, and again, no one owns this discovery, someone noticed that water stored in barrels containing silver coins stayed cleaner longer. The water didn't develop that particular greenish tinge as quickly. It smelled better after 2 weeks than water from identical barrels without coins. Pirates being pirates, the initial interpretation was probably superstitious. Silver was lucky. Silver kept evil away. Whatever the reasoning, the practice spread because it worked. What was actually happening involves silver ions. When silver metal sits in water, it releases ions at a slow, steady rate. Those ions are toxic to bacterial cells. They interfere with the cell's ability to manage its own chemistry, essentially dissolving the structural integrity of bacterial walls. Modern hospitals use silver-coated catheters and surgical instruments for exactly this reason. Water purification systems in some contexts incorporate silver. The science has been understood for decades, and the effect was discovered by pirates in the Caribbean around 1700, because their lives depended on figuring out what kept water alive and what let it die. Spanish silver coins were reportedly considered superior by crews who had tried multiple types. Whether this reflected genuine metallurgical differences in silver purity or was entirely psychological is difficult to say now. What is documented is that some pirate captains maintained private supplies of silver specifically reserved for water treatment, not for spending, not for display, but to drop into barrels. A captain who might trade away gold without hesitation would guard those coins because he understood what they represented. Not wealth, survival. The coins were practical in another way that appealed to the pirate sensibility. They were retrievable. Other preservation attempts, adding cloth or sand as filters, pouring water through improvised sieves, either required continuous resupply of materials or degraded over time. Silver coins could be fished out of an emptied barrel, rinsed, and dropped into the next one. They worked the same the 20th time as the first. For men who lived by improvisation and had nothing to waste, this was a significant practical advantage. But silver and charred wood had limits. They preserved water. They could not create it. When the barrels ran low, when the rain didn't come, when the dew collection was insufficient, pirates needed a more radical solution. And the most technically sophisticated thing that occurred on pirate ships, which were not known for technical sophistication, was distillation. The principle is simple. Boil seawater. The water evaporates, the salt does not. Catch the steam, cool it back into liquid, collect the result. What you get is fresh water. Because the salt was never volatile, it cannot become a gas, so it stays behind. The process sounds like something you could set up in an afternoon, doing it on a wooden ship, surrounded by the very medium that would kill you if you drank it, using improvised equipment with limited fuel, while the vessel rolled in ocean swells, was a different matter entirely. Bartholomew Roberts, Black Bart, who captured more ships than any other pirate in recorded history, over 400 vessels in 4 years, reportedly had a dedicated distillation apparatus built into his flagship. His crew's initial reaction to this project was skepticism bordering on ridicule. A contraption involving copper pots, metal tubing, controlled fires, and collection pans seemed like the eccentric hobby of a captain who had perhaps lost perspective. Then they used it during a 3-week stretch with no rain and insufficient stored water, and the skepticism evaporated along with the seawater. The copper components were crucial and not easy to come by. Copper conducts heat efficiently, doesn't corrode in salt water the way iron does, and was available to pirates primarily through melting down plundered goods, coins, church items, decorative objects from captured ships. Pirates running copper tubing through their stills were burning the physical representation of their wealth to generate a few cups of water per hour. The irony was not lost on them. The math was compelling anyway. Fire management was the constant anxiety. A ship is wood. It is soaked in pitch and tar, which are flammable. It contains gunpowder, which is spectacularly flammable. Maintaining a cooking fire on a wooden vessel required permanent vigilance, even for normal meal preparation. Running a distillation still, which required sustained controlled heat, elevated the risk significantly. A still that tipped during a swell, or that overheated while the attending crew member fell asleep, could convert a water shortage into a catastrophe. Crews assigned to still duty on extended runs worked in shifts, watching flames with the attention normally reserved for watching for enemy sails. The fuel calculation was brutal. Wood burned in the still was wood unavailable for cooking, for emergency repairs, for heat in cold waters. Some desperate crews burned furniture, spare oars, old boots, rope that had been judged too worn to be reliable. The smell of burning rope is not subtle, and accounts mention ships that could be identified at distance not by their flag, but by their smell. A combination of burning leather, smoldering rope fiber, and the particular sweetness of salt water being boiled that apparently became recognizable to anyone who spent time in pirate waters. For all its difficulty, distillation was the only method that actually addressed the fundamental problem. Rain collection and dew collection required weather cooperation. Charred barrels and silver coins preserved existing water. Distillation created water from the infinite ocean that surrounded them, which meant that a crew with a working still and adequate fuel could, in theory, never die of thirst regardless of where they were. In practice, fuel was always a limiting factor. Output was always slower than demand, and equipment failed in ways that were difficult to repair at sea. But the capability existed, and captains who invested in it operated with a margin of survival that their contemporaries did not have. There were other methods, some more effective than acknowledged. Solar distillation using animal bladders, the tough, watertight organs that were standard butchering byproducts, involved filling them with seawater, sealing them, and hanging them in direct sunlight. Heat caused evaporation inside the sealed bladder. Fresh water condensed on the inner walls and could be drained through a small opening. The yield was small. The method required no fuel and no equipment beyond a dead animal's organ and a length of rope. In conditions where fire was impossible or fuel had run out, it was something. Certain seaweeds, particularly kelp varieties common in coastal waters, have a natural capacity to absorb salt. Pirates who discovered this, likely by accident, found that mixing seawater with kelp and allowing it to sit produced liquid that was measurably less salty, not drinkable in the ordinary sense, but potentially survivable as an emergency supplement in ways that straight seawater was not. Marine plants functioning as living filters was not a concept anyone had articulated, but the practical observation that the water left behind after kelp had sat in it was different from ordinary seawater was sufficient motivation to use it. There were also catastrophic failures. Lead pipes and lead-lined containers were used by some crews on the theory that metal would keep water fresher. Lead does inhibit bacterial growth. It also slowly dissolves into the water it contains, and lead poisoning is insidious. It produces weakness, confusion, irritability, and cognitive deterioration before its cause is identified. Crews using lead water systems got sick in ways that were difficult to attribute because the symptoms mimicked so many other things that killed sailors: bad food, fever, overwork, the general physical deterioration of extended time at sea. Some of those crews died of their solution rather than their problem, without ever understanding what had happened to them. The pirates who survived longest were the ones who treated water not as a logistical detail but as a system to be managed, with the same seriousness applied to weapons and navigation. The best captains kept obsessive records of water consumption, enforced strict rationing, even when supplies seemed adequate, maintained their collection and preservation equipment continuously rather than reactively, and invested plundered resources, copper, silver, quality barrel materials, in the infrastructure that kept water viable. They were, without knowing the vocabulary for it, applying what we would now call systems thinking to a survival problem. What is striking about all of this, looking back from a distance of 300 years, is how much of it worked. Charcoal filtration, silver ion antibacterial treatment, distillation as a desalination method. These are not folk remedies that happen to persist because no one knew better. They are genuine solutions to a genuine problem, discovered through desperate experimentation by people who had no scientific framework, no formal education in chemistry or biology, and no margin for error. The cost of a failed experiment was not a ruined afternoon, but a dying crew. Woodes Rogers, the man who found those 17 dying men drifting off Chile in 1709, went on to become the royal governor of the Bahamas, specifically appointed to suppress piracy in the Caribbean. He spent years hunting the men whose survival methods he had witnessed firsthand. He pardoned some. He hanged others. He understood them in ways that most governors did not, because he had spent enough time at sea to know what they were actually contending with. Not treasure, not glory, not the romance that would accumulate around them in the decades after their deaths. Water, the colorless, tasteless, entirely unglamorous substance that determined whether you lived to spend what you had stolen or became the next drifting ghost ship someone else stumbled across on a calm summer morning.